Climate change, some folks that are working at the International Livestock Research Institute have estimated that we have three things that are going to happen to crop production because of climate change. One is the yields are going to decrease, and we can fix that with agronomy. The other is they're going to increase because there's going to be areas where the temperature limitations are not as problematic. We'll see shifts. But we're also going to see places where crop yields are going to decline dramatically, which means that those areas are going to be moving into livestock keeping. And that's another thing we have to be prepared for. Huge emissions coming from burning. If you look at the literature, it's actually a bit unfortunate because the jury seems to still be out and say that if you burn land, you regenerate, you get more biomass, and so you're coming back, and it's a net gain, net sum, zero. So that you are, so people argue that, but they don't talk about the land health. They don't talk about the microorganism. They don't talk about the soil quality that you also lose with those emissions. And you lose a lot more than carbon dioxide. And we've lost tons of carbon through desertification. And this one, grazing-induced desertification, in the dry lands is estimated at 100 million tons of CO2 per year. Now, livestock's long shadow. How many people are familiar with this document? Indeed, it was a bombshell for those of us who really have been promoting livestock. But it was actually well placed. It's brought the attention we needed to livestock. You can argue with the way it was written, you can argue with points inside it, but it got global attention. And that really was, I think, a political move on FAO's part. Now, they're paying the price for it. But I also follow that with Joyce Turk, who is the USAID livestock person, also an artist, said you can't have shadow if you don't have light. So let's talk about the light. Mitigation and adaptation in grazing systems. Now, some of these slides are coming from the FAO because I want you to get a sense of what some of the global statements out there, and actually Sarah and I heard some of these just last week. Mitigation options, of course, improved genetics, animal health, livestock fertility, and feeding. FAO, one part of FAO is saying we're going to be moving from ruminants to monogastrics because we saw that some of the ruminants are less efficient. That's not necessarily going to heal the land. Manure management. We can reduce emissions by how we store and apply manure. We can recover energy from our organic matter through how we process the manure. For example, methane production. And I'm pleased to show this, the Kikanyoki Slaughterhouse. This is in Kajiado, a region right outside of Nairobi. And this is a pastoralist-led slaughterhouse where they're capturing the methane at the slaughterhouse and producing their electricity. And then there's the idea of controlling enteric fermentation, reducing the actual methane emissions that are coming from the rumen by changing the diet. So lower fiber content, but also feed additives and really sort of pumping new things into the animal to manipulate how the rumen responds. So those are some of the mitigation options that are out there. But if we look at how we invest in mitigation and what we get for it, if you look at the smaller circle to the right, that is livestock. And as you can see, that we can continue to invest, but we won't see a whole lot of mitigation just in changing the animal. But if you go to your left, if we invest in grazing land management, if we invest in fixing degraded lands, we're going to get a lot of bang for the buck. So let's talk about capturing carbon in grasslands. So our options around grazing land management, I know as practitioners, none of this is news to you. But this is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they say nutrient management, change your grazing intensity, increase the productivity, fire management, and the list goes on. But these are good grazing land management strategies that will also reduce emissions. They say that improving grazing land management is the second highest technical potential for mitigating carbon emissions. This is great. We have a key here. So how do we promote carbon sequestration? Deep-rooted perennial species, keep a full ground cover, prohibit burning, and do planned and controlled grazing. The potential for carbon sequestration on grazing lands globally, 1.5 gigatons of CO2 equivalent, so that's covering methane and nitrous oxides as well, out to 2030, so that would be per year, and on rehabilitating degraded lands, 0.6 gigatons. It's huge. It's huge. And in fact, some actually a bit older research from 2004 showed that if it just 10% of the degraded lands in Africa were rehabilitated, we could capture 1,328 teragrams. Teragrams is 1 million megatons, so 1 million tons of carbon per year for 25 years. And I just did, this is back of the envelope, not to be quoted, but if you look at how many livestock are in Africa right now and look at their methane emissions, it's 267 teragrams, and the sequestration potential is 5 times that. So we have that opportunity. It's about land management. Sarah showed the livestock density slide here on the left. And what I just wanted to do is just show that in sub-Saharan Africa, and I apologize, that's where most of my experience comes from, so I focused there. Grasslands to the left, grasslands degradation marked by the red in the middle, livestock density, you can see the line up here, right? And then, now brought into the left, the soil carbon gap map. That's where we can get a lot more carbon into the soil, and I think it's quite natural to say that's because the land's degraded and it's lost the carbon, so we can get it back in there. But also, and this is also on a global scale, very important, all of that lines up with where are the drought risk hotspots. If we're not managing our land, we're certainly not managing for water, and where are the environmental conflicts. So it all comes together. And this is a quote from the chair of the desertification conference. And he said they're insatiable carbon absorbers. So drylands can store 46% of the carbon share, and the soils contain 53% of soil carbon, and the plants 14%. So when you talk about sequestering carbon in grasslands, you're looking at about 1/3 above ground and 2/3 below. So the soil has to be taken into account.